Welcome to Surviving Show Business, the podcast that takes you inside entertainment to help you survive and thrive with your host, Aaron Seals. Surviving Show Business is sponsored by NYCastings.com, the place where stars are born. Actors, models, dancers, and singers can join and get casting notices sent to your phone every day. Welcome, folks. Welcome to Surviving Show Business, and today's show is really about surviving show business. We're going to deal with the mental health aspects of having an acting career. And joining us is Dr. Fran Walfish. She's leading child, couple, and family psychotherapist in Beverly Hills. And she's been seen pretty much everywhere, like the Today Show, ABC News, CNN, Time Magazine, the New York Times, Glamour Magazine, the Wall Street Journal. It just goes on forever. So welcome, Doctor.
Thank you so much, Aaron. My pleasure to be with you.
Glad to have you. So today we're talking about mental health in acting. And you probably can help us with these things.
Well, I'll do my best.
Great. Go ahead.
There are different levels of mental health and what's required for dealing in show business. I think, everyone who is in front of the camera knows that a prerequisite for getting there is dealing with more than a fair share of rejection.
Right.
And how does a person deal with rejection over and over and over? Well, there are a lot of different ways, and it's puzzling to some folks. One thing is recognizing that the rejection is temporary. And temporary is a key word because, the real trick to managing the rejection is resilience. How quickly can that person pick themselves up, get back on their feet, and continue knocking on doors and trying? One has to have first a passionate, burning love for their art and craft, and a belief system that they will not be happy doing anything else. And two, the person has to have a certain level of confidence. And confidence is kind of a little bit different than a sense of security. Nobody likes to be rejected.
I don't know.
Believe me, I don't either. But some people can manage or handle a rejection in business a lot better than a personal rejection. For instance, in a romantic relationship, in a parent-child relationship. So step number one is really knowing yourself, and knowing yourself really well. And what are the triggers for you? And also knowing what are your defensive reactions. Do you have the impulse to fight back and attack the rejector? Or do you collapse into tears? How well can you pull back and separate yourself from what you're doing?
Do you have tips and techniques for, getting yourself prepared for that?
Well, number one, I think you have to know yourself well. Take that painful, honest look within. Sometimes it helps to talk it through out loud with another person, whether it's a supportive good friend, an acting coach, a therapist, a pastor, or rabbi priest, or a therapist.
I would say acting classes are very good places for that, because the actors tend to have those conversations when they're in these classes, I've noticed.
I think think it's really good. And you can also experience rejection when you get your first taste of it in the acting class from the teacher who's
Right.
going to criticize your work. And a criticism is certainly a version of rejection. It's saying, I don't really like what you did up there. Show me something else. Mm-hmm. So a lot of people become familiar with their defenses in acting class. And who remains standing after graduation really does tell a lot about who can stand the marathon versus the sprint.
I think that's a really good way to get started. When people get started, they might not be used to a lot of rejection, but if you go into an acting class and you do something and then you get corrected over and over and over, the repetition seems to wear people's nerves down. And then they just go on and do it and have fun.
You're so right on. And there's a parallel in my field of psychology, because we're not allowed to just go to school, graduate, and be off practicing. The majority of training as a psychologist is in supervision. And in supervision, you hear direct criticisms from people who are trained to offer criticisms. So they're going to offer it gently. And I can only tell you there's a percentage of people who make it through finishing graduate school and completing 3,000 hours of supervision. Only a small percentage of those people really go out into the field and open private practice and make it.
Mm-hmm. Now, in acting, you don't get rejected a lot. You just don't hear back from anybody. So there's a lot of just wondering and hoping. So how would a person deal with that? Because you actually just don't get that feedback.
I agree. I think that's the hardest part, frankly. I'd rather be rejected than sit hanging in space, wondering, hoping, longing, waiting.
I say fire and forget. Forget about it the second it's over, but easier said than done. So what would you think would be a good way to get by that?
I think the antidote for that is to stay super duper busy by going out on more auditions. So the more you go out, the less each individual audition or singular job carries importance.
Right.
The more you do, the more practice you have with putting yourself out there and then moving on.
Mm-hmm.
The less you do, the more weight each individual job carries.
Right. What about like the uncertainty? You don't know when your next audition comes. What would you say?
Well, I think that's a really great question, because a lot of actors sit back and wait for their agents to call them and say, go up, go out. I think that's a mistake. I think it's much better for everyone to become proactive and the navigator of their own careers. How do you do that? Well, in every free moment you've got, you go online and start signing up for casting call sheets and, open calls, and do your best to get breakdowns of shows. Find ways, network, ask your agent, where can I sign up to get information about theater or smaller shows or documentaries or non-union gigs, so that you are active. The antidote to depression is staying active. Remaining stagnant and sitting and waiting is the kiss of death because it generates anxiety, worry, fear, silent dialogues of, am I good enough? Did I do a good enough job? Will I stand apart from the others? You don't want to clutter your thinking space with that kind of self-doubt. And it's only natural for all of us to have it.
I love it. And that's exactly what we do here at NYCastings. We're all about finding auditions. You know, our site is you submit yourself to these auditions. So that is exactly how to do it. Just keep moving on. Now, what about setting goals? Because you got to have goals.
Yeah. I think it's great to have long-term goals. I want to be a superstar, right? That's everybody's fantasy.
Right.
You know, I think it's really good to ask yourself not only what your goals are, but why. You would be surprised, you know, how many actors and celebrities I've talked to who don't say, I'm in it just for the fame. Although that's a very common answer. People want the spotlight, the fame. They were often cheated out of a fair share of, and full tablespoon of the right kind of attention that every child deserves from their mothers and fathers. So they go out into the world and look for it in front of the camera. Mm-hmm. There's nothing wrong with that. That's perfectly fine as an objective. But some people are in it for the money. Some real artists are truly into it simply for the craft. They love enveloping themselves into another character and stepping out of their own identities. And they find safety and trust in being another person.
How do you think they could develop that? How do they know? What kinds of things could they do to see if this is really what they want?
I think acting class is really the best. I mean, acting class is a good referral. A good coach will grill and gruel and bolster you and prepare you for what you can expect when you're out on the block. So, number one, you want to arm yourself with the skills and the craft to do shine your best. But I think it requires a lot of self-examination, and I think that's not so easy to do alone. You do need a teacher, a therapist, a counselor, a religious person you can trust, somebody who's been there with wisdom, who can guide you and offer you good judgment so that you can come to know yourself better than anyone else.
Got it. Practical practice from the acting class.
And knowing your truth. The truth always shines through. For instance, you may say you're in it for the craft, but if you're really in it for the fame, that's going to shine through.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so let's say we've done this stuff. We've gone to acting classes and we love it. And we start getting auditions. These auditions are kind of high-stress moments.
Mm-hmm.
What would you say would be good preparations for these kinds of events?
Okay. Number one, it's fine to be happy that you've got auditions coming. But beware. My admonishment is don't celebrate because getting the audition doesn't mean getting the job. And getting the job doesn't mean your career is set. It simply means you are laying one more brick on top of bricks and mortar, building the foundation that requires years of building so that your foundation of your career is solid and does not collapse with one disappointment. You've got a solid base that you can come back to when there is a letdown.
Good. Now, one thing that's unique to acting, it's not like other jobs in the fact that you're being judged on how you look, and people get stereotyped on how they look.
Yes.
How could people come to terms with that?
Very, very difficult. It's really hard. Now, let me say, excuse me, in earlier decades, I think physical outward beauty mattered even more than it does today. Today, we have room for overweight actors and actresses in front of the camera who have wonderful careers. Now I'm embarrassed because I'm having trouble thinking of the right name, but there are some great comic actresses who are less than svelte. You know, I'm thinking of Adele, the singer. She's not an actor, but she's a good example also where, you know, in earlier times, a white middle-of-the-road pop, even pop rock singer could not make it if she was as overweight as Adele was. Right. It doesn't, and so much of it is the singer's attitude. Adele always went out with the attitude of, it doesn't matter, my music is what shines. And Lady Gaga is a wonderful example of that attitude. I know I'm stretching into the music lane, but
that's fine. That's fine. Same neck of the woods.
Right. And it used to be that only African American women, like Aretha Franklin, let her rest in peace, could be overweight, but that's no longer true. And I think the same is happening in the field of acting. However, we all know the Harvey Weinstein story, and we all know the casting couch still exists, and that physical outward beauty counts and matters. I just did an interview this morning for the Dow Jones on a brand new study that says online dating for singles, guys are looking for the optimal woman is 18 years old. They want youth and physical beauty, and women are looking for men age 50 with a fat financial portfolio and bank account.
Wow.
It's disappointing because I treat hundreds to thousands of people every year, and I'm seeing a bit of a trend where we're reverting backward, and you know, people are hungry and thirsty for more substance. They can't have it both ways. So the same is true for acting. If you want to focus on a real career based on truth and art and acting, it doesn't always include having the perfect body and face.
And I think that leads us into developing personalities. Every actor has like the kinds of characters that they can play, or they can develop them, you know, work on their voice, work on their mannerisms, work on the way they dress. Would you have any techniques for kind of exploring a person's own characters?
Well, I think that is in the sphere or the scope of acting classes.
Mm-hmm.
But I do believe that actors, singers, celebrities are best served if they think about being truthful and honest across the board, meaning even when you're in character, even when you are doing an interview, advertising and marketing your latest TV show or film, and even when you're grocery shopping with no makeup and no hair, a ponytail,
Mm-hmm.
it is important to always be your honest, truthful self. And don't get too carried away or smitten with your persona or your status, because the bottom line is we're all the same. We are all imperfect beings, flawed in some way. And when we die, we were all just a speck of dust when it comes down to it.
So true. I think the people that have done the best are the ones that showed the most flaws.
Showed the most what?
Most flaws. Like comedians, for instance.
Yes.
I was watching, CNN has got this show about comedy, and it was one of their episodes was talking about comedians tended to die off soon. They live these wild, reckless lives.
Yes.
And they're happy to show these flaws.
Well, I have found that in general, most comics are, of all the performance art, they seem to be the most pained in their early childhood experience.
Right, and that's what the show was saying too.
Uh-huh. And so when they expose their flaws, they have, I hate generalizing, but if we are generalizing or compartmentalizing, categorizing, most comics have suffered painful childhoods and found a way to laugh at themselves, to make fun of their own issues, but quietly suffer a lonely, painful existence where often they feel like nobody really gets who they are. The pain or the extent of suffering, psychic suffering they experienced was, they feel, isolated and one of a kind. In fact, it isn't true. Somebody should do a group therapy for comics.
They probably do.
There's an idea.
But you know what? Special to comics, they're on the road a lot. So they go travel, do a show, and then they're in a hotel room at night by themselves. So there's a lot of loneliness in being a touring performer. And that can go with musicians and actors as well.
You are so right on. You are absolutely right. And the comics that I've worked with who are married with children,
mm-hmm.
they seem to find comfort in being able to get away from their families and have that isolation. But the wives and kids suffer because they miss, daddy, or I should say the spouse and kids.
Well, it's better nowadays because you can just do a Skype. I do that myself. You can check in with family.
You're so right. But the one thing you cannot do with electronics is physical touch. The physical aspect of daddy giving me a hug on a daily basis is not there for the kids. Daddy tucking me in at night.
Right.
But you're right. The regular communication and seeing each other does help.
Okay, now that brings us into families. Sometimes kids get into the show business, and there's a whole thing with that for sure. Mm-hmm. Maybe have you had experience with child actors? in your
I,
practice?
yes, I have. And it's a tricky thing, Um, I am not an advocate of putting kids in front of the camera, and I'm going to tell you why.
Okay.
For a number of reasons. Number one, kids need to be kids, and the families who come into my office, I think, represent a good smattering of the typical average population where parents are struggling getting their kids to just do the regular menial custodial jobs that all kids have to do, like waking up in the morning, getting dressed, brushing teeth, showering, doing homework, uh, going to bed at night, packing your backpack and being at the car ready to go to school on time. Kids are resistant and fighting with their parents for all of that. So when a parent pushes the child to go in front of the camera, there's a whole new set of expectations and behavioral demands on that child. And what I have found is it fosters a distorted sense of importance in the child, especially if the kid has had some success and is earning money. That kid has a little bit of a grandiose, it's like breeding a bit of a narcissistic personality in the child.
Right.
Now,
And what if they make big bucks? What if they're on a hit show?
oh, I've seen it. And those kids pay for the travel across the country for the whole family and the hotels and the academic coaches so the child doesn't have to go to school. It can be very complicated. But here's what I see happening. In those cases, most often, now I'm categorizing again, but most often those kids fail to have a normal social life. They don't have a best friend, and they kind of miss out on the opportunity of learning how to find their place within a social group. And that's a requirement for every child. That's one of the reasons kids need to go to school as opposed to being homeschooled. Every child needs to know where they belong. Me, in my circle of friends, which is part of the self-identification process. And the kids miss out on that.
Now, you say you don't advise going into it, but what if they're into it already and they're becoming more, they just start working more and more? What could a parent do to keep things grounded?
I think what parents can do is make sure they sign their child up for some sort of group activity, whether it's a sports team or an art or music class or, creating pottery, whatever it is. That child needs an experience of being an equal player in a group where he or she is not special and doesn't stand out. That it's very important for the child to get a message beyond just words of, you really are the same as everyone else, even though you happen to be on a hit TV show and earn money. Because we all know those are momentary experiences. It's hard to sustain.
Mm-hmm.
And you want to build character in your child. I think the most important thing for all humans is how we treat other people. That's a large part of how we reap self-esteem.
Okay, great. Now that brings us back to relationships. A lot of people find it very difficult to date as an adult and be an actor or actress. That's caused quite a few problems. In
Do you mean
fact,
if they're successful and known, or
well,
either way?
just the act of doing romantical scenes with people, things like that.
So what you're asking me is, how complicated is it for actors to do romantic scenes?
Well, I would say, how can a couple deal with the acting business, knowing that people are doing scenes with partners and there's a lot of physical interaction with other people?
That's an excellent question.
Yeah.
Because we all know so many celebrity couples that have met on a set where they were both involved.
That seems to happen a lot.
Look, I can quote Brad Pitt meeting Angelina Jolie when he was married to Jennifer Aniston, and on and on and on and on the list.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's very complicated because the first thing that's so important is knowing you have established a healthy, honest, open communication in your primary relationship with your partner, and talking things through ahead of time. That's number one. Mm-hmm. Number two, the actor must be very, very aware that all kinds of feelings, including infatuation, sexual chemistry and turn on, and projection, meaning you putting onto the other person all kinds of fantasies you've got, including wishes and hopes and dreams. All of that gets activated when you're in a character doing a love scene with another person.
Right.
And you need to find the way to turn the switch off and tell yourself, that is fantasy. It's not reality. Do I really want to risk that wonderful long-term relationships I've built, brick on top of brick, mortar, building, solidifying a wonderful thing? You know, some people do it, and occasionally they're happy. Most often they regret it.
And I guess that happens because, people are in the same line of work. They can really communicate about lots of different things.
Yes. And the turn on of the energy, high levels of energy required to do that art. It takes a lot of energy to elicit emotion on or off screen.
Right.
But it's not the real deal. The real deal is the long-term slow building of care for another person.
Got it. Okay, let's what about people that are feeling that they're failing? A lot of times people have those feelings and then they start hitting the bottle or doing drugs. Could you advise us how to avoid that sort of thing?
Well, it's not easy. I can tell you, everyone has their way of self-soothing. Some are constructive and some are self-destructive. Some self-soothe with, like you say, substances, drugs, alcohol, tobacco, food, sex, acting out, gambling, while others find ways to be more constructive, going to acting class, being in therapy, going to a 12-step meeting, meditating, doing yoga, exercising, eating healthy, eating foods that have tryptophan in it, which is the natural relaxing ingredient, foods like turkey, dairy foods, ice cream, cheese. Those are calming foods. Chamomile tea, taking a warm bubble bath, taking a walk around the block, listening to your favorite music, calling a friend and connecting, going to a movie. There are lots of ways to distract yourself, to calm yourself, and to remind yourself tomorrow's another day.
Great advice. I think we've covered a lot. Anything that you want to add to these good mental health and acting that I missed?
Well, I think there is a point where all of us have to, forgive me, come to Jesus or be so honest with ourselves about, do we have the real stuff to not just be good, but be unique, different, special, and stand apart from the others enough to be able to earn a living? Or would it be wise to now choose another profession, go back to school, arm yourself with a degree and the skills to have earning power so that you can continue to pursue your acting as a desired craft, as a way of healthy self-expression? But do you want to depend on that for life? I know a lot of people in their 60s who are still waiting tables and never made it. And how much of your life do you want to invest? Everything is a risk with built-in costs and price that we all have to evaluate. Do we want to pay that?
Wow, good stuff. Hey, where can people find you should they wish to seek your knowledge even further?
My website is www.drfranwalfish.com. It's spelled DRFRANWALFISH.com. And I can be reached via email at franwalfish@me.com.
Got it. Good stuff. Thank you, Doctor.
My pleasure, Aaron. Thank you.
Well, that's all, folks. Surviving Show Business is sponsored by NYCastings.com, the place where stars are born. Actors, models, dancers, and singers can join and get casting notices sent to your phone every day.